Protecting the rights of multilingual students and families has never been more important. That's why we are very happy to be providing this informational video so that you, as a school leader or school staff member, fully understand the rights that are available to students and families and your legal obligations when it comes to supporting the needs of our multilingual students. This presentation is going to be available publicly. In addition, we do make available the PowerPoint that goes with this presentation. So by using this QR code, you will be able to access that PowerPoint as well. My name is David Nash. I am the Director of Legal Education and National Outreach for the Foundation for Educational Administration. We are the sister organization to the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association. My role throughout the state is to support school leaders, staff members, parents, and really all key stakeholders in understanding their legal obligations on a wide range of critical issues. I am thrilled to have with me for this presentation Dr. JoAnne Negrin, who is a leading expert in the state of New Jersey on so many issues, and those obviously include issues related to supporting the needs of multilingual learners. In a moment, I will ask Dr. Negrin to introduce herself and share a little bit of background information. Before that, I do want to take a moment to thank Family Connections, which is responsible for overseeing the Essex County Hub for the New Jersey Statewide Student Support Services System, NJ4S. This presentation is possible through support from Family Connections, and we are so appreciative to have that support to be able to give you this information. So JoAnne, thank you for being with us, and I would love for you to share a little bit of information about your background and your current role.
Thank you so much, David. I am a retired ESL bilingual supervisor. I was the supervisor for ESL, bilingual education, world languages, and performing arts in Vineland for 12 years. Prior to that, I taught ESL, I taught Spanish as a world language, I taught bilingual education. I'm past president of NJTSL, NJBE, and I was the chair of NJPSA's Multilingual Learners Committee for 8 years prior to my retirement. Retirement is kind of in parentheses because I now have this wonderful new venture with a partner. It's called Language and Literacy Associates for Multilingual and Multicultural Education, or YAMAME for short. And we go all over New Jersey helping school districts with anything that they need related to multilingual learners.
So it's wonderful to have you with us. You have been such a true leader at the state and national levels on these issues. So we're thrilled to have you as a partner for this particular presentation. And this presentation is really meant to help school leaders and school staff members understand sort of from beginning to end all of the rights that are available to multilingual learners and their families, and the various ways in which we need to think about supporting students and families as we go through the school day, as we go through the school year. So we've organized this presentation to walk through issues around registration, issues around the initial interaction that a student and family may have with a school district, with the front office of a school, issues around the role of educators and educational support personnel, issues around families and community, the particular roles and responsibilities for school and district leaders, of course, understanding how to address issues related to schools and potential attempts for immigration enforcement, and making sure that our school administrators and staff understand all of the critical resources that are available to families that can be very helpful in making sure that everybody understands their rights. So JoAnne, thank you so much for your work and for your thoughtful approach to organizing this presentation.
Thank you so much for having me here. And this is something that really is very, very dear to me.
So, of course, JoAnne, perhaps you can lead us through some of the issues at the very beginning of the process for a family when they're coming to a new district and issues related to registration.
Absolutely. And I figured I would start with with registration because really this is usually the first meeting point for families within the school district. And so one thing that we know for sure, and it's been part of federal law for a long time, and the NJDOE has come out and reiterated it, is that all of our children have a right to public education. It doesn't matter what their status is. We want to make sure that we welcome all children and their families, and that we give them our best every single day.
It is really critical. And of course, the New Jersey Department of Education every year does remind school districts of their obligations and put out broadcast memos to the field and stress in those memos that we are never in the business of looking at citizenship status.
So your ESL bilingual supervisor will want to make sure that your registration staff is trained, right? This is the first entry point of students and parents within a school district. And although people generally are operating on the assumption that they're doing the right thing, sometimes we do it out of instinct and not necessarily with knowledge of what the laws and best practices are. So we need to make sure that they know those things so that they can deal with our students and families appropriately. Some of the things that I used to include in my training, and I would always do it in the summer, right before the real crush of registration would start, while they're still calm and able to listen. And then I would do it several times over the course of the school year because you do have turnover in that department and you want to make sure that everybody knows what they need to know. I would include some of the basic laws, including Plyler v. Doe, the right that all of our students have to ESL services if they qualify. I would talk to them about how students are identified. There's often misconceptions, both among staff and among families, on how we identify students as multilingual learners. I would talk them through the home language survey to make sure that they were getting accurate information on the home language survey. That's especially important because that's something that we're accountable for. I would make sure that they place students in an age-appropriate grade level that's not dependent on the level of schooling. So, for example, if you had a 16-year-old whose last grade completed was fifth grade, you didn't put them in sixth grade. And also making sure that they know that students must be allowed to attend, MLs must be allowed to attend through age 20 and may be kept through age 21. At that point, it becomes a district decision, but that is something that they should know so that they don't turn anyone away. And I will have a story later on about that.
It's so important to do this training right up front and to make sure you do it throughout the year. It's a great point that you do have staff members who change, but that staff member who could be the initial point of contact needs to have this information right away because they are in many ways ambassadors to the school district.
And they're also a partner because they're the ones that can identify any issues that I might need to deal with, and then they can alert me or whoever else they need to alert to make sure that we are taking care of the issue that they've seen.
So just to stress a few key points when it comes to understanding family rights during the enrollment process. Of course, we should all recognize that there is no need for a family at any point in time to prove their citizenship status. The Plyler v. Doe U.S. Supreme Court case makes that clear that school districts are to enroll students without considering in any way issues of citizenship status and without requiring any types of documentation that you would only have access to if you were a U.S. citizen. Sometimes school districts with good intentions might list on their website mandatory forms of proof that somebody is truly a resident in the school district. New Jersey law makes clear that we cannot limit the enrollment process in that way. You cannot say that these are the only three types of documents we will look at. Instead, school districts have an obligation to consider any information that comes in that would allow a family to demonstrate that they truly are residing in that community and that the child is entitled to an education in the school district, and to consider the totality of the evidence, of the information that's provided. If there ever is a situation where a district believes that a student is not eligible for enrollment, and again, that has nothing to do with citizenship status, but there could be a question about whether a child is really residing in a community. If there's a dispute over that issue, of course, the family is still entitled to enroll that child, and the family has a right to appeal any decision by the school district that a student may not be eligible. And during that appeal process, the child is entitled to be educated in that school district. If a student is coming from another state or country, that student has the right to what's called provisional enrollment for up to 30 days. And this does give the family time to gather immunization records to provide to the school district. So we cannot delay enrollment because of incomplete information around immunizations or incomplete or missing academic records for that child. If a child is homeless, the district must allow the child to immediately enroll, even without required immunizations. And there is a homelessness liaison that every school district has to have. And one of the roles for that liaison is to assist that child and family on a wide range of issues. But one of those issues is arranging for immunizations. So we do know there are situations where perhaps immunization records are not yet available. That should not prevent somebody from being enrolled in a school district. And of course, if a child is homeless, there is an affirmative obligation for school districts to assist in getting those immunizations. These issues can be complicated, so within the PowerPoint, we do give a link to information on the New Jersey Department of Education website, and that goes through a great deal of information around attendance and residency issues.
And it's also important, I'd like to add on to that, is that all of these things, back to the last life, are very important from a social and emotional and trauma-informed perspective as well. Because when you think about our multilingual learners who are coming to us, sometimes they're coming from situations like our students did that came from Ukraine in 2022, where they grabbed what they could grab and ran for the most part, and may not have had all of their paperwork with them. We've had students who've come from natural disasters where their paperwork just no longer existed or their schools were closed. And so what they need from us is to get them established and have a routine set and start to help them to make their lives better as quickly as possible. So this is something that's not only the right thing to do from a legal perspective, but also from a trauma-informed and social emotional perspective.
It's such a great point, and there are so many challenging situations that families might be coming from. So, being sensitive to that, and understanding the urgency to provide a safe, supportive environment for students and families as quickly as possible is really something we need to stress. Of course, there are constitutional considerations that you do want to make sure all staff members understand. JoAnne already mentioned Plyler v. Doe. That was a 1982 U.S. Supreme Court decision that makes clear that school districts are obligated to enroll students regardless of citizenship status. And we should never be asking questions or requiring documentation that would be proving citizenship status. So that's not an issue that school districts can be involved in any way. There are other constitutional considerations that we want to make sure that staff members understand and help students and families understand. So, there are important First Amendment rights that come into play for students and staff members, but those rights come with responsibilities as well. So unfortunately, we have seen across the country examples of hate speech and speech that amounts to bullying that can target of multilingual learners. And while there are broad First Amendment rights, those rights do not allow students or staff members to engage in hate speech targeting our multilingual learners and students for, of course, a variety of reasons potentially being targeted. There are strong Fourth Amendment protections that are important for families to understand. There are such concerns around immigration enforcement issues and making sure that students and their families understand their rights against unreasonable search and seizure is appropriate and important for school districts to help in that process. There are Fifth Amendment rights. And again, schools often end up sort of in the middle of issues as families are fearful around concerning topics like immigration enforcement. And it is appropriate to make sure that students and families understand their rights, including the right against self-incrimination. You cannot be forced to share information if you are being interviewed by law enforcement that is against your interests. You do have the right to remain silent. There are, of course, are other critical constitutional rights that are important for students and families to understand. The 14th Amendment ensures that we do provide equal protection for all persons regardless of citizenship status in our country, so that we cannot have different educational standards, different school discipline standards, different standards on fundamental issues like that because of citizenship status or any other protected class like race or ethnicity or national origin. And of course, our U.S. Supreme Court years ago did recognize birthright citizenship, that if a child is born in this country, that they are a U.S. citizen, even if that child's parents were not born in this country and do not yet have citizenship status. So, JoAnne, making sure that we equip our staff members to understand these basic constitutional issues and help students and families understand these issues really is important.
Absolutely. And I would also refer them to that New Jersey Department of Education page that you have linked on the previous slide.
So, of course, school front office staff are that first line, aren't they, JoAnne?
Absolutely. And they're the ones that at the school level, at least, they are going to set the tone. Are they welcoming? Are they not welcoming? Sometimes that is the case, right? So we want to make sure that they know how to welcome our families and that they are, it's an atmosphere of kindness. And I really love the illustration here. I don't know where that's from, but I think that it really does show a school that really is welcoming to all of their families, no matter from where they come. The other
It's a
thing about
wonderful
them, though, is that they're
picture.
not just there to be welcoming, but they're also there for a certain amount of safety, right? They're the ones that are in contact with the public first, once someone's in the building, and they are important in keeping students safe. So we want to make sure that they are very well versed in the district's procedures in the event that non-local law enforcement shows up, and that they know not only the primary contact in the district, but also a secondary contact in case that primary contact is not available.
It's such an important point, in the moment, if you have what look like officials, perhaps from the federal level, at a school and trying to gain access to that building or information or students, knowing what to do in that moment and planning that out in advance is critical and not relying on one point of contact because you're so right, that person might not be available.
And you may want to have them role play that. You may also want to make sure that you're including anybody who provides relief at the front desk for when they go to lunch, because they may be the person who comes into contact with someone and they need to know as well.
Absolutely.
Another important thing for you to keep in mind is that you have a directory information in your student management system, and that's public. Anything else that's in your student management system is covered under FERPA, but your directory is public and very often is going to include place of birth. So you may want to let your families and let all of your families know that they can opt out of being included in that directory if they feel like that's not information that they would want to be public.
Just to build on that point, JoAnne, there is a legal obligation for school districts to inform parents every year that they have this right to opt out of the sharing of directory information. And it's important to send that notice to every single parent. You don't want to send it to just a subset of parents, and nothing prevents a school district from reminding parents of that right more than once during the school year. So
Mhm.
you do have that right, and at least annually you have that obligation.
Absolutely. The other thing is that you want to make sure that your parents know the importance of maintaining updated contacts within that student management system. Even during a very calm time, it's not at all uncommon to try to call a family member and none of the contacts that are in your student management system are updated. And so that's something that you need to drive home again and again and again and provide multiple opportunities to make changes because those updated contacts within your student management system can be absolutely critical in the event of any emergency.
It's so important, even a delay of 10, 20, 30 minutes can be an eternity on these issues. So it is so important to be proactive. Now, of course, there are concerns, and these concerns have played out across the country around immigration enforcement. And it is important to be prepared if issues do occur at a school site. So, what if immigration enforcement officials show up at a school? Remember that the person working at the front desk of a school should not be, and really cannot be expected to be the legal expert on these issues. Uh, Issues around who has the right to access a school facility, whether law enforcement at any level, federal, state, or local, has a right to have access to records or a particular student. They're complicated questions. So, a very important part of the training you provide should be that those first points of contact understand they should not be the decision maker on whether immigration enforcement officials or other law enforcement have the right to come into that school. There is a requirement if we have immigration enforcement officials or other forms of law enforcement saying they need access to a student or even student records to have a court order signed by a judge. So, working up your chain of command so that the information gets to a school principal, who presumably would get the information to the school superintendent, who would get the information to the school district attorney to review whether there is a valid order signed by a judge is critical. There are rare exceptions that almost never happen in the school setting, but if there were exigent circumstances, if there was an emergency, somebody robbed a bank across from the school and then ran into the school, of course, law enforcement would have the right and the obligation to address that issue and, would not need a court order signed by a judge to deal with that health and safety emergency that's occurring. Those issues are exceedingly rare. So it will be very unusual that there would be such an emergency that would allow law enforcement officials into the school without that court order signed by a judge. Staff preparedness is critical on those issues. Again, frontline staff members should not be expected to be legal experts. That's not their role. They should just know that this is the protocol, that it's okay to tell this person, we need you to wait outside while we work through our process here. Um, New Jersey law also now prohibits masked law enforcement officials from operating in New Jersey. So there's a new law, and we'll touch on that in more detail in a moment. So if you had masked individuals claiming to be law enforcement, that raises a whole separate set of legal concerns. And the New Jersey Department of Education has put out some very good resources that can help school districts as you're planning for this what if. And it's a situation that we have not seen in any large numbers in school districts, but it is important to be prepared for this issue.
Absolutely. So we want to create a safe and supportive environment, not only for our students, but also for our staff. And so we want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do in order to make that happen. One thing that we want to think about is, what does our environment look like? And so we want to make sure that we have pictures, art, languages, right? Things that are labeled that reflect our school community. What we have within the confines of our school is really ours, right? And that it's a safe space for all of our students and staff, and those are some artifacts that would help to reflect that. And also, if you're a curriculum and instruction person, you might want to think about centering some immigration or migration stories within your classroom or within your curriculum to normalize some of the experiences that our students may have had, and to create some empathy among those who have not been through those experiences. And we want to make sure that not only are our staff trained on policies and procedures, but we also want to create some space for them to have discussions, have mental health resources on hand, and be very proactive about anything to do with HIV, because sometimes that can escalate when situations that are this tense are happening. And a lot of times our staff are reporting feelings of exhaustion and frustration and anger and worry. They're losing sleep over their kids and the situations that they're living in. I remember a lot of Puerto Rican teachers telling me that they were carrying their passports around just in case. And so these are things that we really want to think about. This is not something that's only affecting students and families. It's also weighing very heavily on our staff, who are so deeply invested in the well-being of those children and families.
It's such an important point. And of course, issues that could trigger concerns that are impacting mental health and our sense of safety can be issues that occur locally, but they can also be issues that occur nationally. And we've had, high profile incidents that have occurred across the country that can really raise anxiety, raise fear, raise uncertainty, have students and families questioning whether there really is a safe environment that's available to them. So, JoAnne, it's not just about what might have happened in that particular community. We need to be aware of the larger context, across the nation.
Exactly. One of the things that I know I've been asked as I've been traveling in the state by teachers is, what do we say to students? What do we say to families? And that's difficult, because before we used to say, well, you've been through some things, but you're safe now. You're here, and we're going to help you to kind of, build your life back up. And we really can't, with any honesty, tell someone that they're safe now when we don't know that they're safe. And when schools are no longer, protected places where immigration enforcement does not go. We can't even say you're safe while you're in this building with 100% certainty. So what I've been telling them is, we would say that we would do everything in our power to make sure that you're safe. And it's not the same, but at least it does say that, you're safe with me, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe.
And that's still a very important message. We're here for you. We want to be there to support you and your family. It's a critical message, even if it is a more limited message that we do have to send.
Another thing that you want to think about is, when you do see manifestations of behaviors, that a lot of antisocial behaviors can be rooted in trauma. Even simple things like grabbing things from other students, right? If you've been in a place of scarcity, that might be a conditioned response. And so it's really important to think about alternative explanations for things that you've seen, not to excuse the behavior, but to better understand the behavior so that we can address the behavior, including restorative practices, and also ensuring that our discipline policies limit student contact with law enforcement to those situations where it's absolutely necessary.
And it is important to remind all school leaders and school staff that in the state of New Jersey, there is a very strong focus on looking at school district discipline policies and practices to make sure that there are not discriminatory discipline practices that are playing out. They could happen in a few different ways. Of course, you could have a situation where there is intentional discrimination and you have a student being treated unfairly because of their national origin or race or ethnicity. Thankfully, that is rare, where we would have school officials doing something like that. But we also need to pay attention to disparities that could emerge in discipline outcomes. If students are being disproportionately disciplined, who come from a particular race, ethnicity, or other background, um, we need to pay attention to that data. We need to try to get to the underlying root causes, and we need to look at whether there are issues around staff training and cultural sensitivity that we need to address in our professional learning.
Absolutely.
So, JoAnne, of course, student safety and well-being is such an important topic. The state of New Jersey does require school districts to think through these issues in important ways. So, one of the things that we do give you in this PowerPoint is a link to the New Jersey Department of Education templates for school security safety plans. And one of the issues that sometimes doesn't get the attention it deserves when we're thinking about school security, we have to plan, we know, for crisis situations. They have happened in New Jersey and across the country. But have we fully thought out making sure that we are accounting for our multilingual learners during a crisis situation? For many school districts, there are dozens and dozens of different languages that students are speaking in our schools. And it's completely understandable and inevitable that you will have students speaking languages where there is no staff member who is able to speak that language. And school administrators and educators, have done a lot of work to make sure that we can still provide a meaningful education for those students. But we have to do equally important work to make sure that we plan for emergency situations and that we make sure that those students have the support, the guidance, the direction they need during an emergency where time is of the essence. So,
And sometimes
JoAnne,
that might include just comprehensible input, right? And that's it's an education strategy. We think about that as sort of being the zone of proximal development and what our students can understand. But I want you to think about that also as being on an airplane. And when you get the safety presentation, the flight attendant has no idea who's on that plane, what their educational background is, what their language background is, what their English proficiency level is, but they need to make sure that that student that passenger knows very well what to do when the oxygen masks come down. So we can also employ some of those strategies to ensure that our students who are in the process of learning English know what to do in the event of an emergency as well.
that's such a great example to give. And it is so important to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks and that we don't even have, minutes of delay in these situations. So, making sure that we have a variety of ways we're communicating this information. We're giving strategies directly to students and we're giving strategies to staff members to effectively communicate with those students where they don't know the language, but time is of the essence, and we have to act very quickly. So building that into your drills and practicing those skills and doing that in a thoughtful way that accounts for all students is just so important for us to do.
And I think also talking to students about these drills and making sure that they understand what they are and the reason for them, and it's to be prepared to keep them safe because if they are coming from a war zone or a traumatic environment, they can be very, very stressful.
Absolutely. So understanding that and understanding, the triggers that we could have for particular students and their families when you're dealing with even a drill, but certainly if there is a crisis situation. Building into your protocol support for undocumented students during enforcement efforts is critical as well, and understanding what we will do. Word may spread very quickly if there are, for example, immigration enforcement officials at or approaching a school, and understanding how to handle that, training staff on those protocols, making sure that we do have clear procedures in place around building access and entry points. And for a variety of reasons, those should be limited and should be controlled. It's not just about issues related to multilingual learners. It's just about a safe environment overall for students, families, and staff. So making sure that we've thought that through and thought through the emotional and family supports that we have to provide when dealing with either a general school crisis or issues in particular related to immigration enforcement or multilingual learners and their families.
Very often, your school staff, your teachers, your assistants, particularly your ESL staff, might be the first person from here that the student develops a relationship with, and they may confide in that staff member about their status. And so it's really important that they not include that in any notes, not include it in the student management system. I would say don't even write it on a post-it. And that's because conversations are not subject to FERPA, but if you write it anywhere, it is. And we don't want to have any information. For all practical purposes, we have no idea what that student status is.
That's a critical point, right? I mean, there is, of course, no reason for us to be maintaining that information in writing. It's not legally relevant in any way. Now, I do understand that sometimes students or families will volunteer information, but you do want to avoid creating that documentation and the potential that that information, could be something that is ordered to be provided, for example, through a court order. A court order, won't be relevant if there is no written documentation that is available to be
Exactly.
provided.
So if you need to share this with a guidance counselor, a crisis management staff, an INRS meeting, you can certainly share it with them, but share it verbally and make sure that nobody writes it down.
Of course, access to school records does raise a wide range of important legal issues that we do need to be aware of. Um, School staff should be consulting with the highest levels of the district, superintendent or a designee, before providing any personally identifiable information. So somebody is requesting protected, personally identifiable information about a student, and perhaps they show you some official documentation or show you what they claim is a official document giving them the right to that information. You on the spot in that moment should not be assessing the validity of that request and that information that is being sought. You should work up the chain of command. And there's a very good chance that when you get to the chief school administrator, they will need to get to the board attorney to figure out whether this is a valid reason to be sharing information. Of course, as JoAnne mentioned, there is directory information that can be shared if a parent has not opted out. But beyond that directory information, you do need to be very careful. And court orders and subpoenas can be shown to you that may or may not be legitimate.
And
So,
this is a good reason to have some role playing in your training, because it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to be standing in front of an official who's presenting a document and perhaps being very insistent that they want to come in. So making sure that staff members know exactly what to do and it's automatic is really very, very important.
and there is an obligation built into federal law, built into FERPA, to make a reasonable effort to notify parents in advance of disclosures. So that is built into our federal law, the duty to make a good faith effort to let parents know before you disclose information, even if that person, is entitled to that information. Under our state regulations, parents and students have the right to 3 days notice of a records request that is involving their child's information. So again, this process can get complicated, and we wouldn't expect a person on the front line to know all the nuances of it, but you need to know enough to move this up your chain of command to make sure that you're handling it properly.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about how to really inform and leverage your families and your community because you're a team. And so this is the time to really, you've been building relationships forever with your, your students, your families, your community members, all those sort of influential people within your various communities and constituencies. And this is a time to kind of cash in some of those chips, right? You're going to really try to leverage some of that. It might be parents, it might be older students, your high school students especially tend to be very aware. Your press, right? There's usually non-English press in your local area. If you have a large enough community, make sure that you know some of the writers and editors within the local press. And they're able to do some things that you're not, because as a district administrator, we're a little bit limited in terms of our ability to advocate. And I always say it's sort of a reverse pyramid of free speech, right? We can do sort of the least, we have the least leeway. Our teachers might have a little bit more than we do, but they are also limited. And then our parents, students, community members who can basically say whatever they want. And sometimes a message you may know that something is really important to your community, but you can't be the one to express it. You might need to back channel that and just make sure that the need is presented and acknowledged and addressed. You may not be the one to do that.
It's such an important point. Just imagine a very difficult scenario playing out where you have immigration enforcement officials outside of a school, a student has just left a school, you see an interaction now taking place. Um, if you were to say to that student, you have the right to remain silent, that is very different from saying to that student, do not speak to law enforcement. And they might sound the same, but one is educating the student about their rights. The other is advocating for the student to take a specific action. So, JoAnne, it's not always easy to see the distinction there, but educators want to stay on the side of educating and informing about rights as opposed to advocating for specific positions.
Absolutely. And, as an administrator, you may have feelings about things, and your district might also have a culture, right? Because different districts have different cultures and are of different communities. And so in different places, you might have more or less leeway, but it's always better if it is something that could potentially fall outside of your purview to allow someone else to do that, to address the issue for you. So sometimes we are concerned about bringing our families together in real life because I know one of my recurring nightmares was to be having say, a bilingual advisory committee meeting that is the subject of an ICE raid, for example. That's something that I don't know that I would ever be able to live with myself after that. And that was always on my mind. And so sometimes when things were particularly difficult, we would take the meeting virtual. And so we want to really talk to our families about how to protect your anonymity, should you wish to do so, on a virtual meeting. And so some of the things that they can do are to tell them to change their name to something different on the Zoom, and they can keep their camera off, right? Don't tell everyone they have to have their cameras on. And if they have a question, if they want to say something, they can use the little raising your hand function and or type questions anonymously into the box. And you may also want to consider whether you want to record the meeting and have that available to anyone for posterity, or whether it might be a better decision given the subject of the meeting or anything that's said to just not record.
And when you are thinking about these issues, sending a uniform message to all of those who have been invited to participate in the virtual meeting is important, as opposed to sending a tailored message to one or two parents or families, which could inadvertently lead to some targeting
Hmm.
of those individuals.
Exactly. That being said, one of the things that we used to, that we would consider is if it is a meeting, for example, if you're having bilingual advisory, which does have a fairly targeted group by definition, was not to put that out on blast to the whole district because you never know who might show up or who might not, or what their proclivities might be.
That's
So
right.
in that case, within the student management system, you can say, I want this sent to the parents of students who are tagged ESL bilingual in the student management system, because that's really who that meeting is for. And that way it's only going to go to the people who are affected by the meeting. So you need to kind of use your judgment for that. If it is something that is of interest to the whole to a segment of the entire population, you might want to send it out globally and generally. But if it is something like that, that is really targeted to a targeted population, then there are some more discreet ways to send that.
It's a great point, right? And as you get to that point, and perhaps there is the more discreet notice going out, you still want to avoid sending out an even more discreet notice to one particular family,
Yes.
that could signal, send the wrong signal.
Exactly. And another thing to consider is if you do have live meetings and someone is, some folks are still afraid to go, is there a way that you can have the live meeting but also have that simulcast on Zoom?
Great point. So, of course, we also have to think about the different ways to support our school and district leaders and the critical role that those leaders are playing. JoAnne, with all the other responsibilities that school leaders have, they have an important role in ensuring sort of a calm and uniform response when we deal with challenging issues.
Because what's one more thing?
That's
And,
right.
luckily we do have some really good organizational support behind us, right? Both NJASA and NJPSA have issued guidance for school and district leaders. And so, it's going to help us to be able to refine and share our message because we do have that support behind us. And you want to encourage your superintendent to send messages out to the families right from the district. And so you can, use the guidance that's available to you. You want to make sure you're communicating regularly with your staff because they're worried, and you want to do check-ins. You want to do more check-ins than you would normally do. You want to make sure that you are reinforcing district and school protocols with them. You can provide assurances, and sometimes it's just a question of listening. They are carrying so much right now. All of them care so much about each child in that classroom, and they're carrying the weight of all of the worries of all of those children and all of those families. And so sometimes they just need someone who's willing to listen to them. And it might blow your afternoon to do that, but it's necessary. You also want to make sure that you are communicating with your building leaders so that you're making sure that you know what those protocols look like in each building, because each building might be slightly different. And also making sure that you're coordinating with your families. You can also lead know your rights that are not legal, right? Not the ones that are oriented to immigration, but we have an obligation as ESL bilingual supervisors to talk about parental rights and student rights within a school district, right? So they understand the school district's educational obligations within state and federal law, how your district complies with those obligations, where they can find information about things like student test scores and anything else that they need. Those are really important things that parents also need to know. And it's really our obligation to provide them as the ESL bilingual point of contact.
And of course, ESL bilingual supervisors have such tremendous expertise that they bring to the table, and they have an important perspective that is different from the perspective, for example, of a school principal. But having that coordination, that communication is just so important.
I've always kind of referred to the supervisory roles and the building administration as sort of like the two, I forget if it's the warp and the weft or whatever it is of the two, threads in a cloth, right? The vertical and the horizontal. And so the building is the vertical and they cover everything from the buses to the boilers to the curriculum within the building, right? And then you have the district supervisors who ensure continuity across the school district. And if you have the two of them working together well, there's nothing you can't do.
Such a great point.
So there's a lot of things you can do if you're within central office as well. Depending on what your office is, you're really the locus of information. So if you are a guidance supervisor, you want to make sure that your staff is well trained in all of the social emotional aspects, making sure that they have access to training and resources. They ensure those protocols. And also, if they're high school, make sure that they're aware of the alternate FAFSA for graduation because a lot of our families don't want to fill that information out on the FAFSA and essentially give that to the federal government. So New Jersey has an alternate FAFSA that they can use instead. Make sure that your high school guidance counselors are aware of that and willing to leverage it. And also, if you are the safety and security director, you want to make sure that everybody is very well trained. And I always suggest role playing because it gives people a little bit more automaticity in the moment should something arise. And also some training as far as when to involve law enforcement, not to over involve law enforcement if they don't need to be involved, and making sure that they have some trauma-informed strategies. So we all have a different role that we can play, and it's really important that we play those roles and we play them together. And if you're a building principal, as if you needed one more thing, but this is really critical. It's a critical position. There's nothing that is really yours to do other than just making sure that you're aware of all these other things that are going on and that you're communicating that and that you're helping us to create a united front in terms of the district response. So you want to be familiar with the district policies, the protocols, and that you can communicate that if staff have questions, if students have questions, because you're the one that they see every day, you're the one that they're going to ask. You want to make sure that you're messaging inclusion and representation, using inclusive language. Collaboration, as we've mentioned, is really key. And you want to be familiar with other departments, such as, for example, any initiatives that are happening through guidance, so that you can support them and just be able to maintain an awareness of the resources that are there within the district and the community to support your students, your families, your staff, since you're really the face of your building.
So, of course, as we think about all of these issues, it is important that we understand the details around immigration enforcement, understand some of the recent developments that have occurred, and some of the new laws that are in place that address this issue, and make sure that all of our staff are trained and are not kind of scrambling in the moment to address these issues. So there are important constitutional considerations that we do have to think about, and we've mentioned those under Plyler v. Doe. There's the right to education regardless of citizenship status. As we've stressed, we cannot require proof of citizenship to enroll. There are important constitutional rights that come into play under the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection for all persons regardless of citizenship status, making sure that everyone has due process. And we do have a clear right to citizenship if an individual is born in this country. Under the Fourth Amendment, there are important protections against unreasonable search and seizure. So making sure that if there is a situation where there is an interaction between a student or a family member and law enforcement, it's appropriate for students and family members to understand their rights and their child's rights. And that would include a right against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. So we do have the right to remain silent if there is questioning that is occurring, and it's appropriate for students and family members to understand that right. And we know that there are broad First Amendment rights that are available to students and staff members and others in our community, but those rights do come with some responsibilities. So we cannot, under the guise of the First Amendment, engage in hate speech that is targeting students because of their national origin or race or ethnicity. And we have a long line of state and federal case law that tells us that that is not protected speech. So we do have a legal obligation to address those issues when they occur. It is important to recognize our legal framework under state law and make sure that we understand some important pieces of state law that do provide strong protections for students and families. In 2018, our state attorney general issued the Immigrant Trust Directive, which was really a landmark statewide policy designed to strengthen trust between New Jersey's law enforcement and immigrant communities. It is critical that we have that trust. The last thing we would want, for example, would be for some communities to be reluctant to share information about dangers in their community, about crimes that might have occurred, and that breakdown in trust and communication could undermine safety for everyone. So New Jersey has had since 2018 an immigrant trust directive in place. Under that directive, New Jersey police officers cannot stop, question, arrest, or search based solely on suspected immigration status, cannot ask for immigration status unless it's necessary for a serious investigation. So that would be very rare that you would have our state law enforcement asking those questions, cannot participate in ICE civil immigration enforcement operations. So state and local law enforcement cannot and should not be in some way assisting with immigration enforcement and cannot provide ICE and immigration officials with access to state or local resources, equipment, or databases to engage in their work. So that directive has been around for many years, since 2018. And we do have recent legislation that codifies that guidance into state law. Um, Key aspects of that guidance were put into state law that really block state and local law enforcement from assisting ICE in their operations, including raids or providing resources like office space and databases, restricting law enforcement from sharing a person's immigration status without a warrant signed by a judge, and prohibit law enforcement from wearing masks when interacting with the public. So those are critical state laws now. We already had the Attorney General directive, but on some of these issues, but we now have state law that codifies that and goes even further. We also have the Safe Communities Act that was signed in January of this year that requires our state attorney general to develop model policies for personal freedom in sensitive locations like public schools. So that guidance will be available in July of 2026, and school districts will be required to either follow that guidance through the adoption of local policy or develop local policies that provide even greater protections for students and families than what we have in the statewide guidance. So it's important for school districts to be aware that as of July 2026, that guidance should be available, and school districts will then be mandated to incorporate that into school district policy. So as we think about these issues, it is important to make sure that we are providing the kind of framework at the local level that we need on the ground. But you don't have to be individually the expert on every aspect of responding to issues around immigration enforcement and understanding the rights available to students and families. We have a lot of useful guidance that has been provided by the New Jersey Department of Education. In the links at the end of this PowerPoint, we give you links to that guidance developed by the Department of Education that can be very helpful for you at the local level. It is important for you to remember the constitutional rights that we have stressed throughout this presentation, and the rights to protect confidentiality under FERPA, under federal law. It's important for you to make sure that your protocols, your day-to-day practices are in place to address critical issues, including the control of entry points at school. And it is important for the district, not necessarily the frontline individual who is the first point of contact, but it's important for the district leadership and board attorney to understand the difference between judicial and administrative warrants. So judicial warrants are signed by a judge, and there are other documents that can look very official that are not signed by a judge, and administrative warrants, for example, that are issued by immigration enforcement officials do not have that same legal weight. So getting those documents to your school board attorney to review is critical. And as we've stressed throughout, do not maintain student records regarding citizenship status in any way. There's no need for you to do that for any reason, and it could be harmful to have those records.
Not even a post-it.
Not even a post-it. That's right. When it comes to physical access to school premises, the guidance from the New Jersey Department of Education, again, is very useful on that issue. We mirror some of that guidance here. If an immigration agent is seeking entry in an official capacity, everyone at that school should know we have to bring this up the chain of command to our superintendent very quickly. And the district has to understand that they need to work through a process that would include verifying credentials. Is this person who they say they are? And again, that's not something that someone at a front office desk is going to be able to figure out on their own. That's why we are working up the chain of command. Does the documentation meet the legal standard that does require that court order for student access? Do we make clear that we must work up the chain of command? And even if you have some staff members who are confident they know the law and can do this all by themselves, that's a recipe for disaster. So making sure that everybody understands there is required direction to work to the superintendent, who will inevitably reach out to the school board attorney. So that's critical. Exigent circumstances, as we have referenced before, could occur. There could be an emergency that is such a dire health and safety emergency that law enforcement needs immediate access, but that will almost never occur in a school setting in a way that would justify immigration officials into a school. So that will probably be never be something that you experience, even though it's theoretically something that is possible. And again, being protective of student information is essential in this process. Once you've shared information, you can't unshare it. So you need to be sure that you have the legal authorization before you take that crucial step. There are certain key questions on school security that we do want to make sure we're asking. So, working through questions around law enforcement and access. What are our policies going to be to quickly escalate that conversation and get to the right level, which often, as we said, will be the board attorney? What training are we providing for staff to deal with the issues in the moment? What training are we providing more broadly about just any individual having access to our premises, and limiting entry points, and if possible, limiting physical entry into the building, because security issues do become much more challenging if we have an individual who is inside the building, and then we're trying to figure out whether they really belong or not. So trying to avoid that if at all possible. We've stressed the issues around data privacy and regulations. We've also stressed keeping up to date with emergency contacts, and thinking through and helping families and students think through issues like safe walking routes, and protocols for walking districts, because we do want to make sure that we're helping families think through those safety issues, and not involving the judicial system or law enforcement when we don't have to. So understanding those protocols around law enforcement involvement to minimize unnecessary law enforcement encounters. So you do want to ask yourself and kind of go through a self-assessment process. Do we have these protocols in place in all these areas? And it is okay for you to say, we need some training, we need some work, we need to tighten up our protocols in these areas. Going through this kind of an honest self-assessment is critical. And JoAnne, I know that's not always easy for a district to be self-critical. You know, your districts work so hard, and the idea of going through a self-assessment and identifying gaps can feel a little counterintuitive, but it's better for you to do it before there's an emergency.
Absolutely. You don't want to be explaining why something happened that shouldn't have happened. It's so much easier just to be reflective, without anything having happened. And I would say one of the weak links that most districts have is when you have making sure that you're involving people who are transient, people like your supervisors of curriculum and instruction, anybody who regularly is a substitute principal or assistant principal, making sure that they're involved in those trainings as well and that they understand how things might look different from one school to another, because these are the people who travel from one school to the next. And we know that sometimes because of geography, because of just, logistics in one building to another, the protocols might be slightly different. So if there are students out on the, outside, where do they go? That might be something different in school A than it is in school B. So making sure that anybody who travels to different schools knows about any variations in protocol that are necessary based on the characteristics of the building.
That's a great point, right? And just another example of that might be somebody who works as a coach in the district, but is not otherwise a district employee. And some of these issues could happen, during after school hours when you're working with an athletic team.
Mhm.
So don't forget those staff as well.
Yeah, that was always one of my nightmares, I'll tell you that, was
Absolutely.
to be the one responsible because I was in a building and I didn't know that, something was a little bit different.
Absolutely. So, we've stressed these issues. This is sort of serving as a checklist to reinforce some of the key points that we've made. So, use this. Ask whether you have clear, controlled access to your facilities, whether you understand what to do if ICE officials or other law enforcement show up and are demanding information. Ask if you know what to do for a student on a bus, and all of a sudden, there is no parent at home when that student is dropped off. We've seen that occur here in New Jersey and across the country, and we need to know how to respond in the moment when we have those issues. So having protocols in place, and to the extent that families have worked with you and given you alternate contact information, and given you other authorized places for that child to go, the process goes much more smoothly. So making sure that we've addressed that. We've talked about the importance of working closely with high levels of administration, working closely with parents so that they understand issues like power of attorney, so that if there is an emergency and a child cannot be cared for by a parent or guardian in that moment, that there is clear documentation that another responsible adult can care for that child. So making families aware of those options. And of course, we've stressed throughout the importance of addressing psychosocial and trauma support throughout this process, and making sure that staff members are looked at as safe persons in the eyes of students and families, and that we are ready with trauma response plans, just like we are for a whole range of issues that could
And
occur in the school setting.
I would also add, in addition to the custodial powers of attorney, the conditional power of attorney would be, they might want to also think about a financial conditional power of attorney, because the person that they choose as their trusted person to take care of their child and their access may also have very limited means. So if there's a way that they can access something to help them to do that, that would be helpful as well. So it's just another thing to consider.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, JoAnne. So let's go to families and community.
It always is, right? And so we talked a little bit about leveraging your families, your community, your influential people in the community. I want to kind of circle back to that a little bit and making sure that we're including our older students, right? High school students and even middle school students in these types of trainings. And sometimes it's hard to get people motivated. A lot of times our high school students are motivated if they're aware, but in order to sort of increase that outreach, if you have, for example, a lot of districts have service learning programs, you could probably provide community service hours, give them a little job to do at the meeting, helping to sign people in. And then, oh, by the way, you need to stay and listen. Um, that's a really good way to get a lot of young people out to hear what's going on in their communities that they are part of and things that relate directly to them. And you want to, if, like I said before, if you don't feel comfortable doing sort of the legal know your rights thing because of the environment of your district or whatever your reason, you can always there are lots of community organizations who will come in, who will do that for you, generally for free. And that's a really wonderful opportunity because we talked before about the reverse pyramid of free speech, sort of, and that there might be things that they can express that you, as a representative of the district, would maybe not be able to express in the same way. So leveraging them, leveraging, you know who the influencers are in your community. And so you want to make sure that you're reaching out to them so that they are helping you to diffuse information and correct information throughout the community. Those same people might be able to serve as liaisons if you do have, heaven forbid, a student who's missing, right? One who maybe the rumor is that they've been picked up, or a family member's been picked up, or they're staying home because they're afraid. Rather than sending a truant officer to look for that student, maybe there is a key community member if you're lucky enough to have a community liaison on board. If not, maybe someone that you know in the community that knows everyone might be able to reach out to the family or to the community to kind of help check on them. And not to underestimate the power of our kids because they've got a very different perspective on what's going on this in the school district. And if they're informed about things, they can be such a resource. And I'm going to do a little brag for my former district that has a bilingual dual dual enrollment teacher education program. So basically what that is, it's a lot of students who are ESL and bilingual students, students who are former multilingual learners, even students who have Spanish as their heritage language, who are taking rowing courses at Vineland High School and with the goal of becoming ESL and bilingual teachers. And the courses are given in English and Spanish. And this has allowed people who may not have seen themselves as college material to suddenly have that access and see themselves in a different way. One of the courses that they take is one that's called ESL and bilingual students, more or less. And it's all about what their rights are. So these are some students who are very knowledgeable. One day I was in my office and I got an email from one of my students who told me that they had a friend who went to register at registration. The student was 17, I think. And instead of registering that student, the person in registration gave them a flyer to get a GED. And that student knew that that was not okay. So they emailed me a PDF of the flyer. And so I was able to go down and get that situation straightened out. But thank goodness that this student knew what their rights were, knew that this wasn't okay, and knew that I was the person to contact who could fix it. And so it's really in our interest to make sure that our students are plugged in and aware and know that their expertise at their level is valued by us.
It's such a great example, and so many students who wouldn't have had that same opportunity may not have known their rights,
Mhm.
and you could see some really damaging decisions being made, perhaps without any bad intent, but just a misunderstanding of the law on that issue.
Yeah, exactly.
There are some very good resources available from the New Jersey Department of Education for families, and the Department of Education is constantly updating those resources. So we give you here links to important resources on immigration rights and know your rights, family preparedness planning, which is so important. And it's important for all families because types of emergency situations could occur outside of immigration issues, and planning for those is critical. There are pro bono legal services that are available to families who are dealing with difficult issues, and the New Jersey Department of Education has put important information on their website about that. There have been concerns around our graduation requirements and FAFSA requirements, and fears about information being shared around citizenship status. So there's important information available about waivers that are available that can help address those fears, and lots of other great resources, including resources around attendance and residency that we had previously referenced.
And I would add to that also just make sure that you know of your local resources because you probably have a number of wonderful resources right within your communities. The Department of Education has also provided many resources for addressing trauma related to deportation. And so there are a number of websites here. The DOE has a list of trauma-informed sensitive practices, training on trauma-sensitive schools, a way to guide caregivers on how to talk with children about deportation or separation. These are some really scary issues, and how can we make that understandable in a way that is developmentally appropriate. Ways to support students from mixed status or undocumented families. And also the NEA has provided some wonderful resources for supporting immigrant families that are worth looking at. And also trauma and learning policy, focusing on student success by addressing harms and structural inequities. So these are some wonderful resources that kind of get at the root of some of the things that you might see behaviorally or some of the fears that our students have and how can you address them.
And we know that these issues, are difficult to address, can get somewhat technical. That's why we want to make sure you do have access to all of these resources. And one particular option we wanted to spend a moment in slightly more detail on is the affidavit student option that is available if you have a perhaps emergency situation that arises where a parent or guardian is not available, and that certainly could happen around immigration status. Um, Having thought through the affidavit student process can make sure that the child is still supported, does not have to deal with additional trauma of perhaps no longer being able to be educated in that community. So the affidavit student process requires that the parent or guardian provide a sworn statement, an affidavit typically that is notarized, um, that documents domicile within the district, that another responsible adult is now authorized to support the child gratis. That there is an assumption of school-related responsibilities that this other adult is willing to take on, and that you have provided the appropriate documentation. So you have a sworn statement from the responsible adult in the community. You have a sworn statement from the parent or guardian that they are unable to support the child, or if they're unable to support the child, um, and documentation of financial or family hardship that is causing them to be unable to support the child. So we know these situations can happen very quickly, where there is now an adult who has been detained, and thinking through this process and having it ready in advance for those emergencies can help you make sure that the child is still being supported by a responsible adult that the parent or guardian is comfortable with and that they've had a conversation with in advance. And it makes it a much smoother process, given all the other difficulties that the child may be experiencing, just related to the overall situation. So a caregiver in this situation need not have legal custody or official guardianship in order to take on this role. So it's important to understand that. The process is much more streamlined than that. Um, so a student is eligible for enrollment when the caregiver cannot provide a sworn statement if the underlying requirements are met. So sometimes you'll have a situation where the parent or guardian has identified another adult. That person is willing to take on the role. Perhaps the parent or guardian did not go through the full process of having a notarized statement. But the district does their investigation, determines that this really did occur. The parent really did authorize this other person to take on responsibility. You can recognize an affidavit student even without all of the formal technicalities being met in the process. So the New Jersey Department of Education does have good resources on this. You can certainly consult with your board attorney in analyzing the documentation that is provided. But it's important for parents and guardians to know that this option exists for a variety of reasons. And they go well beyond issues around immigration enforcement. All sorts of emergency issues could occur where knowing about the affidavit student process would be very helpful for parents and guardians.
Absolutely. And we put together some additional resources for you. The first page of resources, many of them are things that we've talked about, and plus some additional resources from the state. And then the following two slides are some other resources from other organizations or other states. So just a number of different resources on different topics, but all of them useful. And so that's a good place to start as far as trying to figure out what the next steps are.
So we do want to thank all of you because we know how challenging these times are and all the demands that are on your plate as a school leader or a school staff member. Together, we can make an incredibly important difference for students and families in addressing, very difficult, emotionally fraught issues. So JoAnne, thank you so much for helping us walk through all of these critical issues.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do thank our participants, and for those who are interested in more information about Legal One, we do provide you a link for that information as well. So thank you again. Be safe, be well, and we appreciate your commitment to supporting all of our students in New Jersey.